I call the honourable member Christopher Hipkin.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I was in my office as this debate began and I heard Nick Smith, the Minister and the Chair, speaking about the community at Pomare. And I noticed that Nick Smith was quite happy to come and turn the sod at Pomare earlier this week when there's new houses to be built, but was nowhere to be seen, and nor was his predecessor Phil Heatley when they were evicting all of the tenants who used to live there and demolishing their homes. Completely invisible. And I say to Nick Smith, yes, that was a community that had a few problems. Those problems haven't gone away by driving all of those people out and demolishing the homes that they live in. They have simply been relocated somewhere else. And actually, if this government was genuinely concerned about addressing the problems that communities like Pomare faced, then they would be concerned about the issues around equality and the massively growing level of inequality that we are seeing in New Zealand. Because the approach in Pomare is absolutely disgraceful. What they did was they said this is a community with problems. They evicted all the tenants and they demolished the houses. Over 100 houses already demolished and more on the chopping block, more still to go. And what's the solution now? They're going to build new houses there. About 80% of those will be privately owned homes. Privately owned homes. So basically we might get, if we're lucky, out of the 100 or more houses to be demolished, there might be maybe 20 new New Zealand houses. Now, overall, there was one comment that Nick Smith made at the sod turning on Monday which I did agree with, where he talked about if we're building new housing developments, it is desirable to have a mixture of private housing and state housing, but in this case, as with every other case, we're losing more state houses than we're gaining. And so overall, the total number of state houses is being reduced. Now, if Nick Smith was saying we're going to build 20 new houses here, and then we're going to have 80 new private developments or other forms of development, but then we're going to build 80 more elsewhere to replace the other 80 that we demolished, I'd actually be okay with that. But that's not what the government are saying. The government are busily demolishing state houses, and I noticed that he snuck into Trentham the other day unannounced because no doubt that's the next area where we're going to see dozens of state houses demolished and replaced with private homes. While again, that community were driven out under the pretence, in this case, of earthquake damage or potential earthquake damage to the buildings. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens when they tied a whole lot of trucks around them and tried to pull them to pieces, because those buildings still seem to be standing. But having said all of that, of course, we want these buildings to be earthquake-proof and so on, but driving people out of their homes, leaving them empty and boarded up for over a year, as they have been now, is not dealing with the issue. So why is this relevant to this debate? Because the government are introducing reviewable tenancies to overall, their goal is to reduce the number of New Zealanders who are living in state houses. That's their goal. They're going into this saying that at least 3,000 people, 3,000 New Zealanders will basically be thrown out of their homes. Now, we have to go back and look at the history of state housing in New Zealand to understand how we've got to where we got to today. Once upon a time, everyone lived in a state house, or a whole chunk of the country lived in a state house. Middle-class families previously lived in state housing, and in the post-war period, there were significant numbers of people who ended up moving into public or state housing. Our societal expectations around who can live in state houses has certainly changed. Some of those people have lived in those state houses for all of their adult lives, and Nick Smith and this government are basically saying they don't care about that. They're happy just to throw those people out and force them to go and find new places to live. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. I also think that the government have failed to consider the significant impact on tenants when they are required to move. So consider a family with children. Those children might be attending the local school and might find that the next place that they get isn't in the same neighbourhood. So massive upheaval for that family. Those kids are going to have to leave their local school, and with all of the upheaval that involves, Nick Smith says, and the cost, of course, maybe new school uniforms, all of those things, Nick Smith says, don't worry about it, not the government's problem. I think that is the government's problem, because I think that's wrong. Consider the fate of Pomare School. Pomare School, who 4 or 5 years ago, before National came into government, had several hundred pupils at them. Nick Smith Phil Heatley and the national government came in and demolished all of those houses, and Paul School now have fewer than 100 kids enrolled in next year. Now, of course, there are over 100 new houses being built there, so that school eventually is going to have a role that's going to go up again. What do they do in the meantime? They went to the government and they said, we've got this transitional problem, and the government did nothing. The government said, we don't care, we're not interested, we don't want to know. Mr. Chair.
I call the Honourable Member Jacinda Ardern.
Surprised by that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.